We will look at the 8th chapter, right? Bhagavad Gita, 8th chapter. So the first thing I was contemplating upon is, broadly speaking, why do we even listen to or read Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam or any such work? It's very good to first inquire into that, I think, because what happens is we tend to read something or listen to something because of various motives which may be unconscious, right? So we always talk of this word shravana, right? Listening. What is the quality of listening is directly connected to what is the motive with which we listen, obviously, right? When we listen to something, if we have a specific motive, accordingly we listen. It's true with anything, any subject matter. So especially when it comes to Gita or anything to do with self-knowledge, there is a tendency to look at Gita as, especially because of its revered status rather, a holy work that is somehow good karma to read, or it's good, it's just punya, as they say, to read. That kind of an attitude is possible, or there may be just intellectual curiosity to learn about what is there in the Gita. But really, all of this, if you really look at it, only comes from, again, the same place within us, which is the egoic identification, right? So when we have identification with the specific idea of an individual, then we have these ideas of karma, and then good karma and bad karma, punya, papa, and also sometimes if we are free of that, we still have intellectual curiosity. And all of these things result in different ways in which we listen to them. So if you listen to it as a simply an auspicious activity, we may not question it, right? And if we don't question it, we don't actually understand really. So Krishna says in the Gita, pariprashnena sevaya, he says, right? You have to listen to it with humility but question. And Arjuna questions constantly, right? He doesn't simply accept whatever Krishna says. He says, you said that now, then you are saying this now, what does it mean? He's asking these questions, right? So it's important to have the attitude of Arjuna, which is to have great love and humility and yet question. And the second aspect, which is equally important, is if we relate to the position of Arjuna, he is not asking out of intellectual curiosity, right? It is a life and death question for him. He is there in the battlefield. He has to figure out what to do, what is right action, which needs right understanding, which needs for him clarity, right? So that is a completely different way of listening from just like an armchair philosopher listening and saying, this sounds right or this sounds not right and all the rest, right? Which is the attitude many of us have, especially when we approach a book like Gita. So that is the second thing which is extremely important, is that neither do we go from the attitude of some projected image of holiness, right? And therefore I think it's great punya to read Gita and all that. Nor do I listen to it from simple intellectual curiosity, which will only stay at the level of the mind and not penetrate into the heart. So especially when we look at activities out of intellectual curiosity, they tend to just build on knowledge, right? We are accumulating knowledge. And then we want to accumulate more and more knowledge. right? And then the knowledge feeds on knowledge, and then we use the existing knowledge to judge what we listen, and then we compare and contrast, and we say, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, and then our agreement is filtered on who is speaking. So if it's Krishna speaking, so we will listen. If someone unknown is speaking, we may not listen the same content, and then we may, most importantly, not have the sense of it is our living, right? So I think that's very important to recognize, is that Gita is about our life, right? Our living right now, and not about either some afterlife or just some philosophical knowledge. Because the problem really we have is the same problem Arjuna has. It's just not as dramatic, is that we are always caught in conflict, right? There is always conflict. And the conflict comes about because of ego. So we have an identification as the me with a character, with an image, with this body and mind. And there is therefore conflict with others, either in terms of liking or disliking. Both are conflict, because I'm either wanting to get gratified or I'm getting disturbed. These are the only two modes in which an ego can function, right? So that's why there is a famous expression, I think in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where it says, where there is duality, there is fear, right? Because the moment there is duality, there is conflict, and conflict means fear. Either I am afraid of losing what I have, or I'm afraid that I will not get what I want, right? Either way, it's fear. Holding on to what I have or desiring what I don't have. It's fear, right? So that fear and that desire and the conflict that comes out of this desire and fear colors our actions, right? So all our activities are colored by this. We do not act correctly. We are making wrong decisions that end up hurting us, and we see that at all levels, right? We see that at our personal level, we see that at the political level, we see people going to war, we see people caught in identification and fighting with each other because of religious identification, because of national identification, and also individually within families, spouses. It's the exact same movement, right? The first thing to recognize is that it's the exact same movement of conflict that happens between two individuals, as between two nations, two religions, anything. So everything is just a collection of people. So if you recognize that that's what Gita is about, is to be free of conflict. That's what Arjuna wanted, and that is what we need to want, right? We need to say, I'm not here to grow my knowledge base. I'm not here to accrue any punya. This is all rooted in ignorance again, as Krishna makes it abundantly clear. The only purpose really for reading or listening to Gita ought to be to live free of conflict here and now, right? And that is the essence of meditation. That is the word, the expression we have in Sanskrit called Jivan Mukti, right? It's a very fancy word, but it simply means living free. That's all it means. Jivan is living, Mukti means free. So we don't have to project it as some state because the word sounds so fancy and only a few people can have it, and we are bound to just live in conflict and always chase a goal. That is the attitude of the ego again, right? The ego then makes itself into a seeker, and then the seeker is a very comfortable position to be, because then the ego says, okay, now I am doing something very pious because I am seeking the truth. And in that very seeking, there is distance between the truth and me, and I never reach it, right? Because the ego is always only interested in maintaining the separation. and not dissolving the separation. So the whole point of Gita, the whole point of Maharishi's teachings, the whole point of self-knowledge is all to show that we can live free of conflict now, right? That is the essence of Gita. So coming to the 7th chapter or 8th chapter now, in the 7th chapter, Krishna concludes by saying that everything that is here is only the pure Supreme Being, right? That is how, because the first 6 chapters, Krishna lays out 2 broad ways, and to put it very simply, all it is one is to offer all the results of action to the Supreme Being and accept the results, which is called Karma Yoga. And it is very obvious if you really look at it that I don't have any control over the results. I can engage in activities, but what happens, happens. And so it is called as prasada buddhi, right? Accept everything as prasad. That is Karma Yoga. So karma, as we already said, is based on ignorance. That is why we have this famous verse in Upadesha Saram begins with, which says, Karturagnya prapyate palam, karma kim param, karma tad jadam. So the karma by itself is insentient, it's jadam, and it binds us, right? That is the nature of karma. He says in the next verse, Kriti mahodadau patana karanam phalamashashvatam gati nirodhakam, right? That is the nature of karma. It makes us fall into the ocean of ignorance. Phalamashashvatam, the results are never guaranteed. And gati nirodhakam, it actually binds us. It stops the realization. Nirodha means to stop. Gati nirodhakam means our truth is veiled by karma. So that's the nature of karma. So we go from karma to, Krishna says, transmute karma to karma yoga. And karma yoga is already liberating, because karma yoga means I don't have this. I first recognize phalam is ashashvatam. I don't have any expectation on phalam. And I also recognize that the fruit is coming from the Supreme Being. So I do Ishwararpitam Nechaya Kritam. So that's what I do. That's the next verse. So I offer the results to Ishvara, Nechaya Kritam, and by that Chitta Shodakam Mukti Sadhakam. By that my mind is cleared of the bondage to results, and my actions are free, right? So that's Karma Yoga. That's what Krishna speaks about. But then he takes it one step further and says, you not only do not have any right to the results, you are not the doer also, if you really inquire carefully, right? And that is Jnana Yoga. So what Krishna says is, in many verses he says that, one of the famous verses is, he says, Ahankara vimudhatma karta ahamiti manyate. He says, the ignorant egotistical person, he takes himself to be the doer. Because if we inquire clearly, we see that activities are done by, as the previous line in that very verse says, Prakrite Kriyamanani Gunai Karmani Sarvashaha. He says all the work is done by the 3 modes of nature. So what we take as this body, or the mind, memory, brain, everything is just one entity finally, is just modes of nature. It's just essentially, to put it very simply, nature, right? Nature means, we tend to think of nature as forests and mountains, but the very body is nature. We in fact have the expression, we say call of nature. So we do the language itself, we recognize, but we don't always act that way, that the very body is a part of nature. So activities of the body are activities of nature. Activities of mind are also activities of nature, because the mind is nothing but brain, acquiring information, and through the information acting based on the memory it has, right? So there is nothing separate as an entity there. This is what Krishna points out. Ahankara vimudatma kartahamiti. Only because of ignorance one thinks I am the doer. In reality, that's no doer. So that's the essence of the inquiry, who am I? So that's the Atma Vichara, or the question Nanyar, who am I? Is to recognize who is doing this work. If you question this, who is thinking this thought? And work is, every action is based on thought. So there is no difference between thought, word and deed. It's all, the word action covers all three, right? So that's why we always refer to as kaya vacha mana, right? Kaya na vacha manasendriya erva we say, because all three are the same. So body, mind, word and body. That's the order, right? So all these three are essentially functioning out of whatever the inputs are into its environment, its collective upbringing, its genetic memory, all the rest, right? So if you really look at it, go to the thinker also. Who is the thinker? We recognize that the thinker is only a product of the same Prakriti. So we think I am the thinker and there is thought, but we really recognize that the very thinker is an idea put together by thought, because there is nothing other than thought which identifies with some image and thinks that's me, right? So that's why Krishna says karma yoga, and then he says karma sannyasa yoga, or it's also called jnana yoga, same thing. So that's why Krishna says to set it all off, he says there is broadly two ways, jnana yoga and karma yoga. But in reality, there's only jnana yoga, because karma yoga, while it seems like separate, in reality, it only leads us to the same non-doership. Because if we function without any attachment to the results, then automatically the sense of doership will go away. So karma yoga taken to its extreme results in jnana yoga, but in any case, it's laid out as two different ways. And it's also more appealing because normally there is a tendency to very closely identify with doership, but at least to recognize that the results are not in my hand is perhaps a little bit easier. So that's why karma yoga is given as the way for what is called as chitta shuddhi. That's why even that verse says chitta shodhakam mukti sadhakam. It is an aid to realization. So this chitta shuddhi that comes through karma yoga has to result in the recognition that the doer is also false, right? So then, after concluding all this in the 6 chapters, in the 7th chapter, Krishna summarizes it all by saying that this leads to the realization, which is called Vijnana Yoga, Jnana Vijnana Yoga, 7th chapter, right? Where he says that everything finally is one Supreme Being, which is me. Krishna is established as the Supreme Being. So he says, all there is me, the Supreme Being, and he summarizes by saying, one who realizes this, he is the true intelligent being, Jnanavan. He says, Bahunam Janmanamante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Sa Mahatmasu Durlabha. So the true man of wisdom, Jnanavan, is one who recognizes that everything here is the one Supreme Being, which through its own energy, which is nature, and its 3 modes, and the 5 elements, and he says all that. He says there are 8 aspects of this, 5 elements being space, air, fire, water, and earth, and 3 subtle elements being mana, buddhi, ahankara, mind, intellect, and ego. With all these 8, the whole of nature goes around doing activities, and the pure awareness that is the essence on which all of this is strung. He says it's like Sutre Mani Ganaiva. Everything is strung together on this substrate of awareness, which is pure being. So towards the end of the chapter, Krishna says that therefore, if you recognize that everything is me, he uses many words. He uses Brahman, Adi Daivam, Adhyatmam, Karma, Adi Bhutam, many expressions he says. And he says, if you recognize all of this is me, every moment until the last moment, then you are free. So each chapter begins with Arjuna asking, what are all these terms? Because these are all new terms to Arjuna. And so he says, what is Brahman? What is Adhyatma? What is Adi Daivam? What is Adi Bhutam? All of this. So Krishna simply describes everything. He says that Brahman, very simply, is that which is imperishable. That's why it's called Aksharam. This whole chapter is called Akshara Brahma Yoga because it is about the imperishable Brahman. That which is imperishable, Kshara in Sanskrit means that which perishes. Akshara means that which doesn't perish. So he says the imperishable is the Brahman, that is our true being, and all the other terms only represent different aspects of it. Adi, Adhyatma means the Jivatma, which is taken to be separate, but in reality it's the same. Adi Bhuta means the elements, which are always forming and unforming, and therefore they are Kshara, they are perishing constantly. The nature of manifest elements is to assemble and disassemble, right? Like this body or like this couch or anything, they will one day disintegrate and then reintegrate. That's a natural process. And Adi Daivam, he says, is the supreme cosmic being, what is called the Virat Rupa, the Purusha, from which everything comes and goes. So the whole universe is nothing but the expression of one interconnected being as a manifest form, right? So that's why later he reveals that Virat Rupa also to Arjuna. So that is only a vision symbolizing that everything is one interconnected being, even at the manifest level. The unmanifest is pure awareness. At the manifest level, all there is one interconnected being. And the one interconnected being has, figuratively it says, even Purusha Suktam, there is a verse, Sahasra Sirsha Purushaha Sahasraksha Sahasrapad. Sahasra literally means, not literally, but actually means infinite. Sahasra literally means 1,000. But what it means is it has infinite legs, infinite heads, infinite mouth, because it is the universe. The whole universe is the Purusha. And that universe is Adi Daivam. And karma, he says, is the activity of Prakriti itself, that which brings forth everything. So then, therefore, Krishna says, if you know all this, and then finally there is a word Adi Yajna, he says, know that to be me, because Yajna, the word literally means sacrifice. And the highest sacrifice is to recognize that the supreme truth alone is, right? So another way to put it more easily relatable is to sacrifice the sense of individuality, right? So we think I am a separate being, separate entity. To sacrifice that is to recognize the supreme being. So Yajna, always Krishna or Bhagavan is called Yajna Purusha, and the inner meaning or outer meaning is, of course, that if you do a fire sacrifice, we are invoking Vishnu and all that. But the true inner meaning, symbolism of that is that it is he alone who embodies the supreme sacrifice. And the supreme sacrifice is sacrificing I and mine. If I sacrifice I and mine, then what remains is he. So therefore he is Yajna Purusha. And Krishna says, therefore, that if you recognize me as the Adi Yajna in the Deha, in every body, I am the supreme embodiment of this principle of sacrifice, which is nothing but another way of saying, I am the only truth that there is, that is pure awareness, pure consciousness, the supreme truth is all there is. And to recognize that is sacrifice. And it's interesting also to look at the word sacrifice, because the English word also is very nice, because the root of the word is to make something sacred. So how do you make something sacred is what sacrifice. It's not just giving up. That is a very superficial meaning of the word sacrifice. The real meaning is making something sacred. And how do you make this own body sacred? By recognizing that this body is part of the divine. There is no individual owner here. There is nobody here other than him. That is when the body is recognized as sacred. So you make it sacred. That's another way to look at it. You give up the sense of individuality. That's another way. Whichever way we look at it, that is what Adi Yajna means. So after saying all this, Krishna says, therefore, and it's a very important verse in many ways. He says two verses. One is, he says, one who therefore has this recognition and abides in me, even at the moment he leaves his body, he attains me. Right? He says, Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram yaf prayati samadbhavam yati nastyatra samshayah. Very nice verse. Antakale, in the last moment, mameva, only thinking of me, Krishna, the Supreme Being, smaran muktva kalevaram. Kalevaram means body, one who leaves the body. Yah prayati, one who goes that way. Samadbhavam yati, he attains me. Nastyatra samshayah. There is no doubt here. Whereas the next verse he also says very importantly that one who thinks of something else, he'll go there. Right? Anything else he thinks of, he will reach that. So yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajatyante kalevaram tamtameti kaunteya sada tadbhava bhavitaha. He says, whatever else one thinks of, he will attain that. So there is of course the beautiful story of Jada Bharata, which we are going through in Bhagavatam too, where he thinks of a deer, and because of that he is born as a deer. Right? That's a very outer symbolized allegorical story showing that one takes the form of what one thinks of. That's what Krishna says, therefore you think of me. And therefore Krishna says that if you think of me alone, every moment, abide in me while you work. So he says, you think of me, you abide in me and fight. Yudhyacha, he says you to Arjuna. And everybody is fighting their own fight, whatever it might be. If you abide in me and fight every moment, your fight of life, then the activity, which is the whatever challenges life throws at one, can go on. But one's inner abidance is in the Supreme Being, and thereby Krishna says, you reach me. And then he also says one important word. He says, abhyasena, that is by. So abhyasa is a very interesting word, because many people normally translate it as practice, right? But I think there's a better way to look at it, because practice, more than practice, what it means is persistence, right? So practice means I can practice something repeatedly, mechanically also. I can practice playing the violin, or I can practice speaking a new language or something. That's not what is abhyasa in this context, right? Abhyasa here, what Krishna means is to take it as one's own life and to therefore be very persistent, as we said earlier, that it is a matter of living and dying. And so be persistent in and be tenacious in this inquiry, right? Not treat it as some form of weekend activity or some form of entertainment. All this happens, right? People look upon a lecture as an entertainment sometimes, or we tend to, as we said, listen out of curiosity and all the rest. So instead of that, if you look at it as a matter of tenacity, that one has to get it, then Krishna says, you realize me. You recognize that this is the only truth. And then he says how you, thereby, if you leave the body, then you are free. Now, one important aspect there, which occurred when I was reading this, is Normally, every translation everywhere looks at the word prayana kale or anta kale as the end of the body, right? As the death of the body. And that's fine, that's one way to look at it. But probably the more esoteric way to look into it, which is much more immediate, is every moment I am born as the body when I identify with a desire, right? So that verse, yam yam vapi, you become what you desire in the next life. It's not necessarily that one has to be born as a deer in the next life. We can see this here and now. If I think of something, that's where my activities go, and that's what I'm seeking after, I'm running after, and that becomes my consciousness. My consciousness is filled with, let's say if I'm desiring a beautiful car, that's what my consciousness is filled with until I get the car. So similarly, when we live in our life also, we carry with us many images of ourselves, right? So we carry this image that at various levels, right? We build up these images and we build it for our children too, unfortunately, by just the way everyone is raised. So we are all raised that way. So we have all these images starting with our identification to the form of our body, whether I'm beautiful or not beautiful, whether I'm then fat or thin, and then on top of that I have an image that I'm intelligent or not intelligent, I'm spiritual or not spiritual, there is 1,000 different images we carry, right? And then I'm a Hindu or a Muslim, and I'm this and that. And so all these images is what we are carrying every moment, and through the image we are interfacing with life, right? So whenever I'm looking at anything, so when Krishna says dying, the inner meaning of that is to die to the images now, right? So in order to live fully, one has to die to the images one is carrying. Otherwise, I am always living out of memory, right? We talked about it briefly about how we live out of images, right? So we are, even in a relationship like a father and a daughter or anything like that, the image is formed, and the image is what they are carrying. And if the image changes, the other person is disturbed in some way, right? So we also want to maintain the image because that is what we are projecting outwardly. And then anytime we listen to anything, read anything, or do anything, the filter which we apply is the image we carry, right? We say, does it agree with this I know? And does it? So the image is living each moment from the past, and we are not dying to the image. So when we say antakale, it can be the end of the body. Yes, that's one way to look at it, because obviously when the body dies, everything goes, right? All the stored memory, the knowledge, the identification, everything goes. The whatever identification that's there, everything goes, right? There is just there is nothing that one can, that's the reason why one is afraid of death, right? Because everything I know comes to an end, right? So the real question for us is, why am I afraid of that? That's a very important question, right? Because it's going to happen anyway. And so we are always afraid of it because we are always projecting time, and we say, oh, this is what I know, and these are the things I like, and these are the things I care about, and what will happen if I'm not there, and all the rest, right? But the reality is it's going to happen anyway. So one way to read this verse very directly is, can I when he says Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram, this, can I make this moment as the last moment? Every moment, right? That is, this moment, can I be free of any image that rises? And that is really the essence of the inquiry, who am I too, right? So to take the I as any image we have is the essence of carrying the past. I mean, there is a famous story, I'm sure you are aware, where once two people who carried a dead body and they went to the crematorium, and then they came back to the ashram, and Ramana Maharshi was there, and they came back and they were very hungry or something, and they were standing in line for food, and then someone stopped them and said, you cannot have food, you have to go have a bath and all that purificatory ritual. And Ramana Maharshi said, it's okay, let them eat. And then the person objected, and he said, well, you are carrying a corpse anyway, he said. You know? So the truth of the matter is, everybody is carrying a corpse around, and see, all these are inner symbolism that has been lost in external rituals. When we say we have to take a bath to remove the impurity of the corpse being carried, that is nothing but taking the bath in the river of wisdom, right? So Ganga is always compared to Jnana Ganga. So to take a bath in the river of wisdom is to remove identification with the body, which is the corpse we carry. But we have made it simply an external purificatory ritual that I carry a corpse, I have to take a bath. No, that's exactly why Maharshi said that's all nonsense, right? So he said, that's exactly the way to read what Krishna says, if we really penetrate into it, is that I am carrying a dead body every moment, as long as I am living out of the past, right? Because the image I have got of me and all that it is put together with, it's all memory, right? And it's likes and dislikes and judgments and desires and fears and all the rest. And that is the I that I take myself to be. And that I is nothing but a dead thing, because it's a memory. It's not the living thing. It's collection of the past. And so when Krishna says, can you leave that and just abide in me? And which is to say, to abide in pure awareness. So that's really, if you look at it, that's the essence of who am I, is that if I am very clear and alert and aware, then I see that what the I take myself to be is simply thoughts and memories that are collected and that I am carrying, like a corpse, literally, as he says. So if I see that clearly and I drop it, the very seeing is enough, right? Because if I see that everything I have is nothing but memory, the I take myself to be, even including my identification as a seeker even, or identification as a devotee, every single thing I have is simply a collection of memory. So if I really look at it and I drop everything, then what remains? What remains is the awareness in which it's dropped. That awareness cannot be touched, it cannot be. That's why Krishna says in the next verse, he says, it's an Upanishadic phrase, he says, Anoraniyam, he says it's subtler than the subtlest. It's you cannot name it, you cannot categorize it, you cannot capture it. It is the essence of everything, it is subtler than the subtlest. So therefore, we cannot actually capture it in any way through any system of knowledge, right? Any system of knowledge can only point out the falsity of the false. That is, as we say, neti neti, right? That which is false can be negated. The truth is always, it is like the space in the room, right? If the room is, this example was given by Ramana Maharshi many times also, that if the room is cluttered with space, I cannot create space. All I can do is throw the objects out. And the more objects I throw, the space is revealed. The space was always there, but I reveal the space by removing the clutter out. So similarly, the pure being, the imperishable being, as here Krishna says, Aksharam Brahma, this imperishable being is our inner, true, timeless space, but we cannot, through any process of accumulation, capture it. Just like we cannot build space through accumulation. Space is what is already there cannot be built. Similarly, what is already there cannot be acquired. We cannot acquire knowledge about Brahman. We can only acquire knowledge, if anything, about the falsities and thereby drop it. So if we are very clear that all that I take myself to be as I is false, and in that clear seeing that everything is only an image finally, and then I build image and I project image on others too, right? That's what we do. We project image on our relations and this and that, but it all starts with the I. So really the fundamental problem is always the I, the image that is identified with. And when we see that all these images are false, and therefore they are the one that is blocking me from seeing anything properly because I'm stuck in this I. If I'm realizing that, that's already a great step, right? That to recognize that I am not what I take myself to be, right? The I that I take myself to be is simply a collection of memory, thought. And if we see that, and thereby we recognize that, and this is causing conflict, this is causing desire, this I is never satisfied, right? It is always either wanting something, or as we said in the beginning, wanting something, fearing something, expecting something, disappointed by something, all the rest. So if I see that this entire movement is silly, because this is exactly what it is doing all the time, not just in me but in everyone. So there's nothing personal about it either, right? This is just the activity of ahankara, is a principle that is there, that is operating as a veil in everyone. It just comes about in different, there's no such thing as my ahankara and your ahankara. There is only ahankara, which is the veil. And that veil is there in everyone. So the true intelligent being, the true jnanavan, as he says, is the one who recognizes that this veil is false, and this veil obstructs me, and this veil needs to be dropped. And if the veil is dropped, what remains is the truth, which is Vasudeva. So that's why later he says in this chapter, again they can be read symbolically, about how one can leave the body in the dark or in the light, right? It's called Shukla and Krishna Paksha and all the rest, right? But I think again the symbolic meaning behind it is, one can, if one is in the dark, then one goes from one image to another. That's why he keeps on returning. So Krishna says in this chapter that even if you go to Brahma Loka, you keep returning, because all you are doing is you are moving from, even within this one life. We don't have to again go to another life, but it's of course the same principle across lives too, that we move from one image to another image. So for example, we see this very clearly. Let's say I am watching, some people do this all the time, they'll watch something, and let's say they don't like something, they will escape to do something else, which is an entertainment. Go watch a movie. So I am moving from the image of, let's say, a disappointed worker to now a consumer of entertainment. This is another image, right? And then from that I move to another image. So this is dying in darkness. You're dying to one image, only to cling to another image. Clinging, right? Whereas Krishna says in this chapter that if you die in light, that is, if you die to all the images, then what remains is the light. What remains is pure awareness. I don't escape from anything then, right? So this is very important for us to recognize. Am I watching myself through the day? Am I escaping one activity to go eat something, or to watch a news show, or all kinds of things people do? All we are doing is we die to one image to cling to another image. And then the same movement is possibly what happens when we physically die as well, is that we just drop this body to get another body in which various other desires are fructified, and then it goes on and on. So that's why Krishna says that's the way of coming back again and again and again. Whereas if you completely drop all images and you do not cling to any image. So for example, if I'm depressed with something, there are two ways, right? One is I can escape the depression, and people have many ways to escape. One is I can read some philosophy to feel good about it, or I can, as I said, people take to alcohol, people do various things to escape, right? But then that's the way of dying in the dark. As he says, you are dying to that image. People even say, forget it, distract your mind. All of these are ways in which people are dying to the image to cling to another image, go from image to image. So the false I, it just takes different avatars, even within one life. So we don't have to even go to another life. Whereas the way of inquiry is when there is depression, or when there is, in fact, I think there was once a very nice incident where in the ashram somebody got very angry, intensely angry. And at that time, Ramana Maharshi tapped him and he said, find out who's angry. Right? So those moments are very powerful. So instead of saying I will control anger, or I will breathe now, or people have all these various coping mechanisms which may work superficially. It's better than letting the anger out in a violent way, but you are still only bottling the anger for it to resurface in a different way, or in an abusive pattern and all the rest, right? But this way is the direct way, which is to find out who is angry. And if you really ask the question, you find that the image is angry, right? You are not angry. The image I have built over time was offended, and that image got angry. And when I look at this very clearly, then there is, in that clarity, there is awareness, right? I don't have to do anything. Just the looking clearly that who's the I, that the question, of such a powerful question, who's the I that got angry, brings you back to your own home without even using the word Brahman or awareness or anything. Because by recognizing that the I that got angry is simply an expression of thought which is built through memory. I have built expectations and I have built certain ideas, and you have come and offended those ideas and I got angry. All of this, if I can see clearly in that moment, then there is freedom from anger. And that's dying to that image completely. And if I can die to the image completely in this way, then I can die to the beauty of that is that will bring about a death to all the images too, because it's the same movement, right? The same building up of image to create anger is what builds up fear, is what builds up depression, this and that. So if I'm very, that's why Krishna says the word abhyasa. So if I'm very persistent and very tenacious, that is, I do not go away, like they say, stare the beast in the eye, they say, don't go away. If you stare the beast in the eye and look at who is having this anger, who is having this, and by that you can die in that moment and be free, and you abide in Krishna, you abide in the Supreme Being. So that's the way one can read this verse, which is the essence of this chapter. And then he, of course, says, thereby you can realize me. So if you do all this, if you recognize if you recognize the art of dying, which is what this chapter can be called actually, because he speaks repeatedly about dying in this chapter, how to die, when to die, where to die. And all of this, while outwardly it can be taken literally in terms of the time of he refers to Uttarayana versus Dakshinayana and all the rest. But the inner meaning of all that is that the ascendant phase is the phase where you are abiding in awareness and dying. The descendant phase is the phase in which you are just dying from one image to another image. So if you read it with this inner eye, then everything is made clear. And then he concludes this chapter, therefore, by saying that if you abide in this way, Then he says, such yoga is the greatest among everything. So if we are able to thereby abide in him, knowing everything and thereby not getting deluded by anything, then that is the greatest way of yoga. He says, Vedeshu yajneshu tapassu chaiva daneshu yat punyapalam pradishtam atyeti tat sarvamidam viditva yogi param sthanam upeti chadyam. So by knowing everything, one knows everything. All the Vedas, all the yajna, all the tapas, all the charity, everything is covered if one can abide in this yoga, which is the Akshara Brahma yoga, which is the yoga of the imperishable. That is to recognize through this direct inquiry and through dying to the false I and thereby being established in the imperishable. And that is how we can look at the essence of this chapter.